Welcome everybody to my podcast, Big Little Small Talk. I'm Megan O'Hara-Sullivan and I love to talk, but I also love to listen. If you're new here, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome listeners to Big Little Small Talk. You're with me, Megan O'Hara-Sullivan, and we're here today with a fellow by the name of Tony Kyprios.
Yes.
Now Tony, you are neither a horse by the name of Kyprios,
No.
nor are you the stage name of David Coles, a Canadian hip-hop musician.
No.
You are Tony Kyprios,
Yes.
who grew up in Toowoomba and
Yes.
has a really long-standing connection to this place.
Yes.
Tony, tell me about growing up as a Greek
Yes.
person in Toowoomba. You lived in town. Whereabouts did you live?
We lived in town above some shops that my parents had. Mum and Dad had a cafe called the Sorrento going back years ago, and I remember Dad saying they actually put the first cab rank out the front of the Sorrento back in the old days. We were next to Mr. Michael, who was quite famous back many years ago, with his wife Mrs. Michael and their daughter Mamie. They lived next door, and so we lived in town. The building doesn't exist anymore, but it's where the sports club steps are as you enter the sports club. And on the left-hand side, up to the corner of Russell Street, was the Toshak Hotel, which was an old hotel when Toowoomba had 50 or 60 hotels back in the old days. So I grew up there till I was about 12, and then my parents decided to move out of town. In those days, they had a business called the Regal Cafe, which was opposite Piggott's, and so the buses would stop out the front of Piggott's or out the front of our shop. And I remember it was a colossal business that they had. Mum and Dad had 28 staff and 5 cooks, and it went 6 days a week. Sundays was close the shop and do repairs and clean and stuff. And so I grew up and spent a lot of time in town until, like I said, I was 12, and then Mum and Dad bought a house of friends of ours that had initially built out there. They'd sold to people from the Gold Coast who had built really extended on the house, and then Mum and Dad bought it. So we went from living above shops and traffic out into the country. I remember the first 3
Whereabouts
nights.
in the country was it?
Mount Kynoch on Murphy's Creek Road, number 19. And I remember the first 2 or 3 nights that we were all out there, none of us could sleep because it was quiet. We were used to hearing traffic in the main street all night, things like that.
Tony, who else was there besides you? Did you have any siblings?
I have an elder sister. She was around for some of the time. She went to Fairholme, and while she was at school, she had a wonderful gift for languages. So by the time she left school, she spoke 5 languages fluently. In her grade 12, she had won a scholarship to France, a scholarship to Germany, and a scholarship to Japan, which she took the one to Japan and went and spent 12 months there. And prior to her going there, Mum and Dad sent her to Greece for 16 months to go to school there. So
Did you have that same experience?
sadly, not long after my sister came back, and she was 3 years older, I think within about a year and a half or 2 years, Dad's only brother who remained in Greece passed away. So Mum and Dad didn't really want to send me over with other relatives because none of them were his direct family. So I didn't get to go. I went over in 75 for a 6-7 week tour with the Greek government and caught up and met family then.
So Kyprios literally means Cypriot, as in from Cyprus. Were your parents...
Initially, no. What happened was my father's father, my grandfather on the Greek side, was half French and half Greek. So we had a different surname. But with German occupation, sadly, my grandfather in Greece was originally Athens' leading coppersmith and silversmith. So they were very wealthy. They had maids, gardeners, things like that. But when the Germans came into Greece and into Athens, the SS confiscated their home, all their belongings, and kicked them out on the street. So they went from having everything to having nothing, which many people in Greece didn't experience because even with German occupation they still had a home. But my family lost their home. So that changed a lot of things for them. And then at one point, because of curfews, I remember my father saying that he refused to stand up in a bus for a German soldier. So they put him off the bus, knowing that by the time he would get home, he would be in curfew, and they would get him. So, knowing that this was going on, he quickly got home, packed up, and took off. Made his way to Turkey to get away from the Germans. Got caught. Got put into a detention unit. He and another guy or two dug themselves out so they weren't shot the next morning because they were going to be shot. And a monk found Dad, put him in a cave for about 3 weeks. And in all of this, Dad had his name changed. So initially it was Frangakis, and then it became Kyprios, and then when he came out here it became Kyprios.
What age was your father when he came? And did he come straight to Toowoomba?
After that, he made it to Egypt, and when he was in Egypt, he was a driver. He joined the Air Force and was a driver. And what happened was the Air Marshal of the Greek Air Force in Egypt was looking for someone to drive his car, someone honest, and someone to look after his wife and children. So he asked around, and everyone kept saying, oh, if you want someone honest, you want to go and see Steve. Because Dad wouldn't take tyres, he wouldn't move hash, or he wouldn't move like many of the other people were in the black market. My father was a person who, your handshake was your word, and you never, if you said what you were going to do, you did it.
Was he Stefanov, or what was his real name?
Stellinos. Yes. So Dad ended up being interviewed by the Air Marshal and got the job as being his personal driver. And over the time that he did that, they became very close friends. So when Dad had the option to get away after the war, he wanted Dad to actually go to South Africa, which is where they went, to Rhodesia at the time. And they became big landowners. They're not now because of so much happening over there. And they kept wanting Dad to come and go into business. But Dad had an uncle or a relative in Gosford. So he took a 10-pound boat back then, got a ticket from the Air Marshal, Marcos, and Dad made his way to Sydney and then to Gosford. But then at some point, he also found that there was someone else that he could work for up here, and came up to Toowoomba, and that's sort of where he stayed, because he came to Australia not speaking English. He couldn't speak anything. Most of the jobs that he got were in cafes working, and so you'd start the fire in those days at 5 a.m, 6 a.m, because everything was wood stoves out the back, and he would work till midnight, and that was 5-6 days a week, and then he would spend an hour or two before he got 3 or 4 hours sleep trying to read the newspaper to teach himself how to read and write English.
Where was the cafe that he went to work at, do you know?
No, in Gosford, I don't know. And when he came up here, I understand there was Ferros, Mr. Ferros, had a little cafe somewhere in town, so Dad started working there. I know he set up a little place at the front of what used to be called Londi's, which is now Zach's or the Four Seasons, but in those days there was... it was like a pond, and there were shops going around a U-shape. And he had a fruit shop there, which is where he met my grandmother, and my grandmother suggested that my mother go down and see him. He had also set up a business in Warwick, in Oakey, called the Cecil, and spent about 15 years out there.
What sort of business was that?
It was still there up until a year or so ago. It was just a takeaway cafe business, which was still there up until a year or two ago. And that enabled him to bring his brothers out. He brought 3 out to Australia, 1 stayed in Greece. And they all came out to help him, but as they got on their feet, they would take off. Then he'd bring another brother out to help him. So when he left there, he came into town, and my mother had these 2 shops, and her sisters had the other 2 shops, which had Mr. Michael in it. And someone had set up a cafe, but they'd never done anything with it. So Mum approached my father to see whether he might be able to help her, and that's how they sort of met and came into partnership. And
what was you said that it was your grandmother who suggested that your mother meet up with your father. Mm-hmm. When they eventually got together, how was that received?
By my grandmother was fine, but most of the other family, and sadly most of these were O'Briens and McCaffertys, they were all staunch Catholics. and my mother married someone in the Greek Orthodox Church. So on the day of their wedding, not one of them turned up to the wedding, because in those days it was frowned upon. But fortunately my grandmother loved my father, and that side of the family, the Baths in this house where I'm living in now, they raised my mother for many years, because when my great-grandfather came back from the war, he was head of the Defiance Mill, being the eldest of the brothers. He died 3 years later from gas. And so my mother was 4.5. She was living around the corner in West Street with my mother and her twin sisters, who were all just around 2. So in those days, because it was a struggle and she was a single parent now, they sent my mother up here to be raised by her great-grandparent or her grandparents and all the aunts that lived in the house. So that's the connection that I have to this house, of my mother growing up here, and then my great-grandparents being here, and then I've been here, my sons have been here, and we've had this house since 1917. The house was built in 1904, and a Scottish family owned it up until they sold it to my great-grandparents. And here was 400 acres here that went out towards Drayton.
So we're on Alderley Street,
yes.
And this is your mother's side of the family, had
yes.
400 acres attached to this house.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And what did they do? Did they farm? They must have.
They did, and they subdivided. The park at the back, Butt Street Park, in 1967, the neighbours used to tell me the road stopped because they owned the park, and it was a cow's yard, loosened paddock for a cow. And if you look, because my house is on an angle, if you look upstairs, you'll see 2 house blocks over. That was also part of the original house block. So it was the width of the park, and it came here. So in 1967, they gave the park to council so that council could put the road through, and then they were just left with the house block. But before then, they bought a property called Eaton Vale off Sir Arthur Hodson, and they had 33,500 acres there that took in all of Cambodia. But that was back in the mid-1800s. And of course, even then, there was still anti-German sentiment. And my great-grandfather, he was German. So, they had a lot of losses. They had their wool shed burnt down, their crops burnt, rams were killed, merinos.
So are you saying that somebody set fire to the house and set fire to the...
Yeah, the bank manager. The bank manager had confessed to everything on his deathbed, that he'd done everything.
And why was that? Just the anti-German
sentiment?
What year are we talking here?
We're talking close to around 1880s, around there. So after they had that, there were 18 in the family. There were 20 children born, 18 survived.
Oh my goodness.
So my grandmother was...
20 children.
Children born, 18 survived. And a lot of them were boys, a lot of them were men. So they worked the farm. I know that all of my uncles were wonderful cooks. They did all the cakes, which these days it's more the women, but in those days...
Except if you're a celebrity chef,
yes,
then you're a man.
Then you're a man, then you're doing it. But these days it seems to be something that primarily women do. I love cooking, so it's certainly my family in the blood. And they were the big cooks. So they worked the farm, and the women worked the house, kept everything, washed, ironed, made... Because in those days you made everything. So I remember my great-grandfather never drank, never smoked, but he loved tea, and he would import boxes of tea from all over the world, because it was just something that in those days he enjoyed doing.
Now, you just made a reference before, Tony, to the Defiance Mill. Tell me about the story of the Defiance Mill and why it's called Defiance Mill.
Okay. My great-grandmother on the O'Brien side, she was Irish. She came out here with her husband, and they went into partnership. Next door to where Rose Building is in Russell Street, there's Victoria Street. But in the old days, there was a building there, and it was called O'Brien Crisp. And they had like a co-op shop there, and I'm not sure how many years it was, but her husband passed away, and she decided to buy out Mr. Crisp, and went ahead and did that. And a lot of Germans were in Highfields around GM and stuff. They kept coming in because she was a co-op shop, coming in to buy things, and bit by bit they kept asking if they brought her flour, could she mill some flour, and could they do some exchange and things like that. And of course, because she was a woman, a lot of people said, "Oh, you can't do that." So, in defiance to being told that she couldn't do it, she went ahead, and for 99 years the family had something to do with Defiance Flour. And that's really where it came from, and what happened was that there was this necessity of a lot of poor Germans just trying to make ends meet, growing and bringing wheat in, and she started milling it, and then it just went on from there.
I like the sounds of that woman. So what was her name?
I'd have to... what was it? Mary, I think it was. I'll have to look it up, her full name. Yeah.
Tony, let's just go back to talking about you being a young Greek guy growing up in Toowoomba.
Yep.
How was that for you? Were you part of a Greek society, or was there a lot of kids like you, or did you feel like you stuck out like a sore thumb?
Oh, well, I stuck out like a sore thumb. Yeah, there were a lot more Greeks back in those days. Lots of them were in business. They all had cafes and businesses up here. It just bit by bit, it was a traditional thing that, as they started to come in from out of Roma and all these other places, Charleville, my godparents owned half of Charleville. They still own half of Charleville. They all migrated towards a bigger Greek community, which was really in Brisbane. So over many years, Dad was the president for 17 years of the Greek community in Toowoomba. But the numbers just kept dwindling and dwindling till now. We have a small community, and it's a very active community, but it lacks the numbers that were back here 30 years ago, 40 years ago, because people have just migrated to the bigger cities where, they have a big Greek church, and there's multiple Greek churches in Brisbane to deal with the number of people there. And it just changed dramatically. My experience was that, I had a lot of contact with Greeks in those days. But going to school in Toowoomba back in the 60s, it was still very much, I was a WOG, a Dago. I had that every day, all my life. It was disappointing, but it definitely toughens you up. Like, there's very little things that people could tell me now that would offend me.
That you wouldn't, that you hadn't heard once or twice.
And of course, I was probably, my mother said, you're just a few generations ahead of your time. I was into acting and singing and all sorts of things. So I did 9 years dancing. I acted with the Queensland Theatre Company. Marcel Marceau, who was a famous mime artist, he personally offered me a 3-year scholarship when I was 13 to go to France, and he would personally tutor me. But at 13, I didn't speak French. I thought it's a bit much. But I loved acting, I loved dancing, so, I was called everything under the sun then. Because in those days, boys didn't dance, right. Boys didn't sing, boys, you played football, you played cricket, which I did, and I was a great sports person. When I left school, I broke all sorts of records at school for cricket and hockey and soccer and running and long jump, but all of that was always overshadowed by I was a WOG. Right. I was a Dago.
I'll just remind the listeners that they're on 40dB, 102.7 FM, and you're with me, Megan O'Hara-Sullivan, and we're talking to Tony Kyprios for Big Little Small Talk today. And Tony's a long-term resident, both sides, well, not both sides of your family, certainly your mother's side of the family, and your father was an immigrant here. When you see, particularly, say, the Syrian and the South Sudanese and the people that our face of Toowoomba has changed over the last, say, 10, 15 years, do you have a certain sympathy for them, or did you not feel that was your history as an outsider? That was your father's history?
I have a sympathy for them being displaced. I don't think it's probably the best thing. If you take everyone out of Syria, who's going to be there to look after Syria when it settles down? I know my father often said, people these days have got it too easy. When he came to Australia, there was no handouts, there was no accommodation. You had to get a job, you had to get this, and you had to go out and make a life. Now, you don't have to do much of that. You come to Australia, we give you a substantial amount of money, and you can afford to get a new car. You can afford within 4 years to get a house. And it doesn't seem to be what it was if we were to try and compare to his days to these days. These days seem to be very, very different.
Yes, although I often feel that people don't necessarily want to leave their country. They want to stay where they were, but through circumstances, war or whatever, have been forced to come. So, Tony, let's talk about what you did when you finished school. What happened then?
All right. Because I was dyslexic and school really wasn't my thing, it was interesting. I was left-handed before I went to school. Then they forced me to go right-handed, and then I had a range of issues. But school really wasn't for me. So by the time I was 15, I realised I needed to get out. I'd gone to prep, which I loved all my life. In those days, it was the Church of England Boys' School. And I loved it because there was a freedom. We used to take pocket knives to school, and we'd go to the woodwork shed, and the woodwork guy would give us timber, and we'd spend all day whittling boats. Well, they would have a coronary if you took a penknife to school these days. So many things have changed. There were 300 children rode their bike to school. Now, most schools have the bike racks hidden so that you don't ride a bike to school. It's very different. But I got to 15 and realised school wasn't my thing. By then, I'd been asked to leave grammar because I was more into acting and things like that, and I wasn't a scholastic type person. I was more hands-on. And so then I ended up going to Downlands after grammar asked me to think about moving on. And then I ended up, when I was there, I realised it really wasn't my thing. Being dyslexic, I remember spending 20 weeks on a project. When I handed it in, I was marked failed because he said, I don't believe this is your work, you couldn't do this, and yet it was all my work. So that was the end of it, and I said to my parents, look, I've got to get out. So fortunately, they went guarantor for me, and in about 1981, I borrowed $140,000, which was a lot of money then.
It's a lot of money now.
Bought a farm, and I went from school out to there living on my own at 15, working 7 days a week.
Whereabouts was that?
Out at Felton. And it was 120 acres on the Hodson Creek. On the other side of me was Prestbury Horse Stud. And I started doing 7 days a week, small crop farming, which was like dairying because you've got to irrigate morning and night. And it went on 7 days a week, day in, day out. And, I realised at the time, I thought, my God, I'm getting a university degree that no university is offering. That's really what it was. It was a real eye-opening experience. And, you say to people, every choice you make, there are consequences. I never realised the consequences of my choice because, I was into acting, dancing, all sorts of things, choral society. As soon as I moved out there at 15 with no licence, all of that was cut away from me.
That's what I was about to ask you. You couldn't even drive yourself into town. No,
it was completely, everything was cut away, and I was now cooking for myself, working. I kept a log one day, and, on busy seasons around garlic time and stuff, I would work 134 hours in a week. That's 4 hours sleep a night. And that was 7 days a week, and I was 15.
And you had no one on the farm with you?
No, I started off with a partner, but he wasn't there. And within 12 months, I bought out that partner, and then it was just mine.
What were the logistics like? How would you get your produce to market?
Oh, well, I would send up to 1,000 bags of carrots a day down to the markets. In those days, the little side street that McDonald's is on in Margaret Street, there's a side street runs up, I can't think of the name of it. There was a big shed there, and they used to be a wholesale. They would send a truck and a dog out to my farm every afternoon. It'd start Sundays and they'd finish on Thursdays. And I would send 1,000 bags of carrots, 1,000 bags of onions, whatever it was that we were growing. And they would take it down to Brisbane and sell for me. And it was colossal business, but it was back-breaking work. It was all just really on my own. I had issues with people not wanting to work for me because I was inexperienced, but the big thing was, like, I'm not going to go and work for a 15-year-old.
You're a child.
I'm a child. I'm going to take orders from him. And all I'm trying to do is run a farm and pay the bills. And all this other stuff is coming in that I'm having to deal with. So there was a lot as far as my education went that I didn't get at school. I said to my son, son, I've got to send you to school, but you're not going to learn anything. It's domestication these days. Now, children know how to say yes and no to authority. And the proof that they're not getting educated is, after 12 years of school, most children that I meet, the first thing they need is an education.
Well, let's go back to you.
Yep.
So what happened?
I was there for
farm?
3.5 years.
3.5 years.
And one afternoon, we had 7.5 inches in 40 minutes. And I had 28 contour banks on my farm. Everything got washed out. The creek flooded. All my tractors, my truck went under. I had 3 tractors, everything. I had an $80,000 bill for mechanical. I had a $120,000 erosion bill. And I lost all the crops because you can't insure small crops because the price fluctuates week by week. So that was sort of after the neighbours came and helped me out, and I sort of got my head on above things. I just thought, I'm better off going to the races, because it's such a gamble. That I'd worked for 3 years, and we were paying the farm off and all the rest of it, but I wasn't able to get ahead because there were so many things kept happening. Like, that was really the straw that broke the camel's back. So we decided to sell. I sold. I came into town. I went actually down to the coast for a while just to have a break, up to Noosa and then down to the Gold Coast. I came back. Then I was working for, I needed to actually get a job. And someone said to me, Coles does night filling. I thought, night filling? What are you talking about? So I went up to see them at Coles. And it was in the afternoon. And I remember it was when Coles was a standalone, New World, on the top side of Myers. So I went to see them, and the woman said, look, the nightfall manager will be in soon, you can talk to him. Well, I talked to the guy, Kim, who was the nightfall manager, and he took me around the front. He said, look, here's an exercise book. It's 3/4 full of names. He said, it's pretty hopeless. He said, you don't want to. I said, I want to put my name down. He said, you're kidding. I said, if I don't get my name in the book, you'll never get to me. He said, are you that serious? I said, yes, put my name in the book on the last page, I don't care. He said, well, if you're that serious, will you come back at 5 o'clock? I said, sure. So after 3 days of working there for them, he said, look, someone's going to be going on holidays. Would you be prepared to do, because I worked hard? And I said, sure. And that turned into a full-time job then. And in 2 years, I became a nightfall manager for Coles. In 5 years, I became their youngest 5th grade manager that they'd ever had. And they kept wanting me to move, and I said, no. In the end, I took a transfer and I went and opened Redbank Plains for them when they opened that up. Spent 7 months there, nearly every day, 7 days a week, because I had to set the supermarket up with people from head office, and then had to hire. We went through at least 1,000 people just to find the right people.
So, Tony, what do you do now for a living?
So now, after all of those things and other things, I've been for the last 15 years or more a transpersonal emotional release counsellor, which works on subconscious stuff. And that then forced me at some point to look at hypnotherapy and becoming a hypnotist to help people change behaviour. And I also studied in something that really fascinates me, because anyone can hypnotise anyone, is NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, how people really do what they do. So I started working and studying that. My parents became ill, and with my sister being away and living elsewhere with children, I came back from living in Pakistan for 6 months, and I realised I needed to stay and help them. So in those days there was no carers benefits and nothing, they wouldn't pay me anything. So I thought, well, they've looked after me, I'll look after them. So I spent 12 years looking after them.
Is that living in this house where we are now?
No, they were living at Mount Kynoch. I was sort of living here, and then for a while I lived out there to help them get in and out of bed and cook them meals and stuff. And I started working on this house as a way of maybe in the future being able to catch up to 12 years not really being able to work while I looked after them. I did do the odd bit of work here and there wherever I could. As I trained as a counsellor, I was approached by a beautiful Aboriginal woman who was running a drug and alcohol rehab in Moree, Roythorn House, and she asked me would I come down and do a weekend workshop with her people. So I said sure. So I went down thinking I was going to be working with clients, and she said no, I need you to work and fix my workers first. And I thought, wow, what an incredible woman, to supporting the workers so that if they get better they're going to offer better service to the clients. So 1 month workshop started to happen, and then fortnightly, and then will you come out on a regular basis, and then within 6 months the psychologist left and I just took over from him, and then I was working for the Pious Medical Service. They gave me a room at the Aboriginal Medical Centre, so I was working 4 days a week for Roythorn House, and a couple of days a week doing stuff for Aboriginals out there, counselling, dream work, sand play work, symbol work, drawing, a whole range of things. And that's when I realised, I was hearing horrible stories. Lots of people have horrible backgrounds that, you can only dream about. And I realised that unless I found some things that would create change for people, I was going to kill myself listening to 8 hours of this stuff every day. It was soul destroying. So that's when I quickly thought, well, I used to hypnotise friends when I was a kid out at the farm, 15, 16, but I never knew what I was doing. All I could get them to do was walk around the front yard mowing the lawn without a mower, and I'd be laughing my head off thinking, this is incredible. So I paid good money and found a government-accredited training group in Sydney, Rhonda Stewart, and so I went to see her, and there was a 12-month, she said it was part-time. I worked out it was a minimum 30 hours a week, so it was pretty full-time, and it went for 12 months with 2 trips for a month or several weeks in Sydney. And that really gave me tools that made a difference. And like I said, the NLP stuff really fascinated me. So when people come to me, for example, and they say they get depressed, then it's to find out how they do it. So things that I've found is, most people, when you think about something, you will see them in colour. I found most people who do depression, they will have their images internally in black and white. So when you get them to change it, the first thing they say is that feels different, because it changes how we feel. And then I started just listening to people. People were telling me, I'd watch their language. You know, I've got thoughts that go round and round in my head, and I go, oh, they go in that way, do they? Because they were moving their fingers. And I just started to find that the combination of unconscious work, the hypnosis and the NLP, really gave me things that was able to very quickly start changing people's behaviour.
Well, I'll just remind the listeners at that juncture, Tony, that they're on 4DDB, 102.7 FM, the community radio station, and we're in the segment called Big Little Small Talk, and we're with Tony Kyprios, who has taken me on a hell of a journey from a farm at 15 to a hypnotherapist at...
Yes.
Well, first of all, we started off as the night fill manager in 1982 at Coles, and now we're a hypnotherapist. Can you, I know it's all clear to you, Tony, but to me, as someone who's never been hypnotised or even seen anyone being hypnotised, what does it involve?
Okay.
Yeah, what's it about?
To me, trance work, and that's really all it is a natural state of being. I am very honest and tell people straight away when they come to me, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to hypnotise you, because you have to do it yourself. I point out to people, you and I can both watch TV together, but you can't watch it for me and I can't watch it for you. So it's about creating a range of selective suggestions that are appropriate to the person, that in a state of trance we are able to actually place the suggestions in the person's mind without judgment and criticism. Now, when I say this natural trance state, I point out to people, we're in and out of trance every day. If you stare out the window, which I do with a cuppa sometimes, and I drift away for 20 seconds, I have a daydream. I've gone into trance. No one's done it. I've done it myself. When we read a book, we can at some point get ourselves lost in the images that we start to see. If we watch TV, multinational corporations know that if you stare at the idiot box, you'll go into trance, and they create suggestions, which are ads, that they repeat over and over and over again, hoping that it's going to stick. And that's really what it's about. I found doing a lot of driving, and people who do a lot of driving can probably relate to this. When I was driving to Moree every week on a Sunday, there'd be often times I'd get to a point and go, how did I get here? Because my mind just takes me away. I haven't been unsafe on the road. I've been with it, but part of my mind has just drifted away, and I have gone into a trance state, not really knowing where I am until I come back into conscious awareness. The other time I find that most people can relate to going into trance is if you go to the movies. Now, because I used to fly to America a lot for 10 years and see clients over there, and I used to present in Boston at the world's biggest convention for hypnotists, I used to find that you go to the movies, you walk in, there might be 50 or 100 natives already sitting in their seat, and you find your seat and you sit down and the music starts and you get that wide-eyed stare, and as the movie starts, even people next to you disappear, because once again, now I'm back in trance. So I find really with hypnosis, all we're using is a state of being that we are in and out of all day, but most people aren't aware of it. So I can't get someone to do something they don't want to do. If it goes against your moral fibres or your beliefs, then people will not respond. It's really important to find out what a person's wanting. I even ask people to write down in their own words what it is that they're looking for, so that I can use their even words back to them that they will accept. Because if I start to change it, then they'll go, "Hang on, that's not what I said."
So tell me about the actual process. Someone, you see clients here at your house,
Yes.
or do you have a
No, I used to
shop?
have a clinic, but now I just see them from here.
So do they lie down on a couch?
I just have them sit in a comfy chair. At some point we'll put them back. And I have a little card that I teach people self-hypnosis. Because honestly, all hypnosis is self-hypnosis. If I was to sit here and say, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, the word I relates to ego. And I hear a lot of egotistical hypnotists out there. Yeah, I'll do this and I'll do that. And I think, well, that's not true. You require the person who you're working with to do it. Really, that's how it goes. So I ask people to get comfortable in a chair. My simple steps are close your eyes. But one thing I do get people to do is roll their eyes up. And I found, because I like to research, I don't read much, but I do a lot of research. So I researched and found a Dr. Spiegel in Germany that spent 6 years watching people's eyes. And he found that if you roll your eyes up and look up, and you can see quite a lot of white under your eyes, you are going to find hypnosis very simple. And I find most people are like that. Now, the reason why he gets people to roll their eyes up and why I now ask people, when you close your eyes, do this, is that I found that all people are wired the same. I've seen people go into seizures, I've seen people pass out, and when they do that, they disconnect from their conscious mind, and the first thing that happens is their eyes roll up. So I thought, I'll just use what we're all wired for. So that's usually the first step, is close your eyes, roll your eyes up, close your eyes. Because we now have our eyes closed, when we lose one of our senses, the others heighten. So I ask people to focus on the sounds, because now a ticking clock that you didn't notice, you'll notice. Then I ask people to just find a rhythm of breathing that's very comfortable for them. Then I ask them to recreate relaxation. So I'll ask them to create relaxation around their eyes to a point where they don't want to work. And I'll ask them, I just need you to pretend, but I need you to make it real enough so that when you go to test them, they don't want to work, and they'll test and their eyes don't. I say, good, stop testing. Then I'll ask them, we'll do what I call is a deepening exercise. So we'll spread the relaxation throughout their whole body. Then, to get their mind relaxed, relaxation of the mind works differently to the body. It's about working on the screen that we have internally. So I give people maybe 4 or 5 numbers, and I ask them each time to see, say, the number 100, rub it out, get rid of it, let me know when it's gone. Good. And I'll nod, I'll say, give you another number. That starts to, with each of those numbers, create mental relaxation. Then I'll ask them to come down a set of steps which will count down to go to either a country garden or somewhere, the beach, or somewhere that they feel comfortable. And I'll give them some suggestions around feeling relaxed and comfortable in this place. And then I just ask, is the subconscious mind ready to do some work, yes or no? And usually I ask people, I'll set up a yes-no on one hand with their fingers, because when some people become profoundly and deeply relaxed, they can go into a catatonic state where they don't want to physically move. And it makes it difficult to communicate. So if I preset people a yes-no with people, then if they go into that state, I can still communicate with them and we can still do the work. And then I find, the truth is, I believe every person that comes to me already holds the answers to their questions. It's just helping them find the answer. So really, I don't know anything about what this person needs, so I have to keep asking them, their unconscious mind, is there something that we can release now in relation to this anger or this frustration that they're experiencing, yes or no? If I get a yes, a lot of people will assume that the unconscious, the subconscious, will go and get rid of it. But it will just respond that yes, it can get rid of it. And I see a lot of people who come to me going, I saw someone, they said they were going to do, but nothing changed. And I think it's how they actually ask the mind. So once the mind says yes, it can get rid of it, I say, can we get rid of it now? Yes or no? If I get a no, which sometimes happen, I'll ask the subconscious, does something need to be released or changed first before we can release this? I always get a yes. Then I ask the subconscious, can we now go and do that? Let me know when that's done. Always ask, let me know when it's been done, because otherwise the subconscious will just go, yes, we can do it, but nothing changes. And then I just go through this process of eliminating, whether it's anxiety, frustration. I have a 100% success rate with anxiety because I believe it's because unconsciously we don't see a future. Often people who are anxious, they will say, look, I just feel like I'm spiralling out of control. In other words, they're not going forward, they're not going backwards, they're going round and round. And that offers no direction to anyone, and I believe that creates a lot of anxiety, especially in young people. We have a lot of young people who I see these days, teenagers, who, they're leaving school, they have no idea what they're going to do, they have no incentive or enthusiasm to really go forward other than to maybe play some games or do something like that. And that creates a lot of anxiety for people because at a deep unconscious level, not only their unconscious knows what the hell's going on. Where are we going? We're here for a purpose. I believe the problem, most people here do not understand that they're here for a reason, and they do not understand who they are or what they are. They identify with being a teacher, or I'm a painter, or I'm a builder. No, they're things that you do. That's not what you are. See, I believe that all of us, the main thing that we are, from the moment we're born, are creators. We're creating our life. We're creating what affects us. We're creating the choices that we choose. We're creating the consequences of those choices. Everything that we do is about creation. And yet most people do not understand that because they're lost.
Tony, do you think that this occupation that you have now is the perfect sort of marriage of your creative side when you were younger and you're sort of having a job, I guess? Is it... It
allows me to be very creative with people because the truth is, like I said, I don't know what anyone needs. It's about sitting down with them and helping them find out what needs to happen. I can help them, anger seems to be a big thing for people, and yet most people don't understand why they're even angry. And I'll share with you what I found in my experience. There are only 3 things going on when someone gets angry. The first thing is that someone hasn't said what you wanted them to say. The second thing that triggers anger in people is someone didn't do what you wanted them to do. And the third one that I can find is that your assumption that someone should respond a certain way wasn't met. That's it. There's no other reason why people get angry that I can find. Once people start to understand that, that can start to give them that they have a control. Because, we are constantly looking outside of ourselves, and I like to point out to people, there's nothing going on outside of you. Nothing. Every experience that you've ever had, every thought, every emotion, every tear, every sound of joy or happiness has come from the inside. There's nothing going on the outside. But in our society, we direct people that their happiness is when they leave school, when they buy the car, when they get the house, when they get married, when they retire, when they go on the world cruise. All of these things are outside of ourselves, and people chase them because they're told that's going to make you happy, but they very quickly find out that it doesn't really make you happy.
Well, look, Tony, I am on my countdown here, and I'd like to ask a few general questions at the end. Now, this will be interesting for you, Tony. In 3 words, have you only got 3 words that you can say? In 3 words, I am.
A creator.
A creator?
Mm-hmm.
That's 1.
Yes.
Creator.
See,
have you got another 2?
Well, I use these words I am a lot because they're very powerful. I am a creator. I am love.
Mm-hmm.
And I am what I believe.
What you believe. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
I like it a lot. What about what made you smile today, Tony?
I smile all day.
You do, indeed.
I'm happy all day. And the reason for that is because I've realised I'm in a state of being grateful for everything that I have. I have a home. I have food in the fridge. I have safety at night. I have people in my life who love me and I care about. I have nothing to complain about. I am forced to be in a place, well, I'm not forced to, I choose to stand in a place of being grateful all day. And that just keeps putting a smile on my face all day long.
Very nice answer too. You said before, you made reference to the fact that you're dyslexic,
yep.
And you also said that you don't read very much.
But I have read a book or 2.
Oh, good. Well, what was the last good book
You
read?
The last good book was Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, which I would suggest many people to read. And I think the one before that was The Richest Man in Babylon.
And what's the essence of both of those books?
It's really about breaking away from what you've been told. See, people have been given, that go to school, get a good job when you leave, go to university, that'll help you get a good job. Really that boxes people in. You'll find the people who are more financially wealthy, because that's not necessarily success, but the ones who are financially wealthy are doing it very differently to where most of the sheep have gone. Because I think most people are sheep, they just keep following each other. Even if there's a cliff, they'll all jump over the cliff. We've seen that lately. So I like to think that, it helps people to realise that most people who have done something amazing in the world haven't followed the sheep. They've done their own thing. They go their own way. Hence, the poor dad, most people are poor. I find it's quite easy for people to make money. It's hanging on to it that's the problem.
Yes.
You see, because most people don't understand money. There's a difference between money and currency. Most people believe money is currency. It's not. Currency is a worthless piece of plastic that only has a value while people believe it. But if you take a piece of Egyptian gold that's 4,000 years old, that has a worth. That is money.
Okay, very philosophical, that one, yeah. A bit more lighthearted, this one.
Yep.
If you were in a circus, which character would you be?
Oh, I'd have to be a clown. I'd have to be a clown. I've got the hair.
I'll just tell the listeners, and you can go to the Facebook page and have a look at Tony's photo. A long, grey, curly... Well, it's not a mullet because you don't have anything on the top,
No.
but you do have a long,
That's living
grey...
a fast life.
That's a fast life. Right.
Does you? The front stuff comes off.
Okay, what is the worst present that you've ever been given, Tony?
Oh, gosh. The worst
You probably
present.
don't think about it in the negative like that, I suppose.
I
Well, what
don't.
about the best present? What's the best present you've ever been given?
The best present has been time that people have given me. I think our time is by far one of the most valuable things that we have. Apart from that, it would be the kindness and the love that my family, my grandmother, people like that gave to me. That, I know when my parents passed away, I was not upset because I thought, wow, what a great journey they've had, and they needed to go. They were over it. And I think just by being in that kindness and that love, I had no regrets. I think that's the sad thing. People end up with a lot of regrets in their life. A lot of pain and hurt comes from that.
Now, I've got to admit, when I go to interview people, I like to have a look at what sort of social media presence they've got, or I try and look them up on the internet to see. And I did... well, first let me ask the question. Have you ever stalked anyone on social media?
No.
Well, I will continue telling my story about
Please.
you, because I could find hardly anything, because your Facebook is full of all of these motivational quotes like,
Yes.
I don't fix problems, I fix my thinking, then problems fix themselves. Just because I didn't react doesn't mean I don't notice. So after about the 1,025th of those, I thought, I can't find anything on this guy.
Okay. I am a bit mysterious.
That's right.
I am a bit mysterious.
Leave the stalking to me.
Okay.
All right. So, Tony, are you a royal observer or a watcher? Do you have a favourite royal?
No, I don't. And I'll be honest with you. About 10 years ago, I said to my son when we were renovating, I'm going to cut TV out. Is that okay? And he said yes. So we haven't had TV in the house for about 10 years. So I don't watch the news. I sort of figure, why watch a program that starts off by saying good evening and then they're going to tell you for the next 20 minutes why it's not. So we don't watch the news, and I just don't watch TV. I would much rather watch something educational, or, I prefer to sit down and have real conversations with people that go into some depth and some meaning.
Where do you get your news from? Do you listen to the radio?
No. Usually it's talking to people, observing people. I'll pick up the odd thing, but it's usually not on mainstream media. I find that's very limited what they
So
show
you don't know your Meghan and Harry gossip or
No.
anything about
I know
the
they're out there.
coronation? Or...
I know they're out there doing their thing, and you know, they could be somewhat victims of themselves.
That might be true too. Now this is going to be an interesting question for you. What's the song that can't keep Tony Kyprios off the dance floor? There'd be a few, I'd reckon.
There's actually quite a few songs.
Oh, I'd reckon there would be.
Look, I love music and have done all my life. My son and I share music because he's 19, so he has a whole different genre. But I love listening to stuff that he shares with me, and I'll share stuff with him, and then I'll hear him playing his stuff, my stuff in the shower, and he hears me playing his stuff. So really, you know, I grew up a lot when I was out on the farm. I got into reggae. I love the beat. So, you know, my mother at the time, she was in her mid-60s. By the time we did a few trips to Brisbane and the Gold Coast, because we had a house down there, my mother was quite au fait with a lot of reggae and Bob Marley songs, which I always thought was fun.
So do you have a favourite Bob Marley?
No, I don't. No Woman, No Cry is a good song, but no, I don't really. Buffalo Soldier. There's a whole heap of great songs. I just like music, whether I sing to it or not. I do like singing, so in the shower is a good place. And I've had to take a leaf out of children, because working with a lot of children, one thing I love about kids is if they don't know, they don't care. They'll just make it up as they go along. They're not embarrassed. And I've had to take a leaf out. So sometimes I don't know the song, but I'm singing away. I make up my own words, and they've got it, because you still feel good afterwards.
Yeah, no, look, that's a perfect place to finish this interview, Tony. I think you're absolutely right. Just fake it till you make it, and just enjoy it. Enjoy.
That's what it's about.
Yeah.
Life to me is we're either making a movie or writing a book. We are the producers, the directors. We're the main character. Just make sure that you're not making a horror movie out there or some drama, which some people seem to be doing, because you could make a love story, you could have a comedy, you could have an adventure.
Well, that is perfect. Tony Kyprios, thank you so much. You're just such an interesting character. You've had a really diverse life, and it's just been a pleasure to hear about it here on Big Little Small Talk. Thank you for being my guest.
Thank you for having me on. Thank you very much.
That's it for this week. Thanks for joining me on Big Little Small Talk. I hope you can make the time to join me next week. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favourite podcast app.